All for being here, and I'm going to pass things off to Scott. So, Scott, thank you and welcome.
All right, Alex, thanks. I appreciate the chance to be here again. Hello, everybody. So I am Scott Bown, founder of Caregivers Resource Group, and I'm a flat fee advisor, meaning I just charge for my time. I don't collect assets, don't sell any products, and I just focus on working in the caregiving space with families who are providing the care, as well as the other side, helping the person receiving the care, making sure both sides are on the same page. So I'm excited to talk to you today. I want this to be conversational. So as Alex said, if you have questions, go to the chat or raise your hand, and I'll ask some questions along the way to try and spark some conversation, hopefully. And certainly at the end, there'll be some time for some questions as well. So thanks for being here. I'm looking forward to talking with you folks a little bit about um, the impacts of being a caregiver and the financial side that you have, your retirement, college planning, whatever it might be. So today we're going to just talk about something most people don't fully plan for, but just about everyone ends up dealing with. And that's how caregiving fits into your life, your time, your money, your ability to stay on track for future goals, retirement, maybe buying that other home, taking vacations, whatever it might be. Now, I don't want this conversation to be theoretical. So, as we go through this, I want you to start thinking about your own situation, maybe what's already happening, or if you can see down the road a little bit about some changes that might be coming up. Certainly, if you're here today, caregiving isn't something you've just heard about. It's either already part of your life or it's starting to become part of your life. And instead of focusing on when it started or when it's going to start, what really matters is how this is affecting you right now. And I want you to start thinking about, is it taking more of your time? Is it changing your daily schedule? Is it starting to creep into your workday? I don't know. Does any of that sound familiar to anyone? So you don't have to share details, but even just a quick show of hands, how many feel like this has already started in some way?
I see a couple hands, and I
Couple
do want to
hands.
clarify. It looks like the Q&A feature is active. I just can't see it because nobody's asked a question yet, but it should be there. I see the
Awesome.
raise hand is working, and then also Scott, for reference, the attendees are muted, so unless they raise their hand and we unmute them, they wouldn't be able to speak. So, um,
Oh, okay.
but just as a
Well,
clarification, and then they can
appreciate
also
that.
react.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
hopefully one of my questions will be so intriguing that they'll all want to jump in. But so for most people, being a caregiver doesn't always happen at once. It can build over time until it starts to change how you spend your time and your energy. So most people think of caregiving as something that takes time or something that is emotionally challenging, and certainly both are true. But the other piece that often gets overlooked is what we're going to be focusing on tonight is how it turns into financial decision making and certainly hugely impacting your financial situation. So let me explain what I mean by that. Caregiving isn't just about the care itself, it's about the decisions that come with being a caregiver. And every time you step in to help your loved ones, you're making a decision. And every decision you make has an opportunity cost. And certainly, sometimes that opportunity cost is money. And sometimes that opportunity cost is your time. And sometimes it's actually both. But if you handle a certain caregiving task yourself, You may avoid paying for the help, but now you're using your time. And if you pay for help, you protect your time, but now you're spending some of your assets. So, what you're really doing, whether you realize it or not, is you're constantly deciding where your time goes and where your money goes. So, let me ask, when something comes up on the caregiving side, what's your first instinct? And you can leave it in the chat. Do you tend to jump in and handle the task yourself, or do you try to find help right away? Any thoughts on that? So most people tend to default to using their time first. It feels less expensive. It's often easier to do. There's a certain level of control. I'm going to do it better than anyone else can. But here's where it starts to get real, if you will. Let's say you might save $500 to $1,000 a month by doing the task yourself. But if that starts to impact your work or your income, the real cost could be much higher over time. And so here's another way you can think about it. Every one of those decisions has a return. It's just not all financial. And the other aspect is what's best for your loved one as well. So there's kind of a balance. You're trying to decide, is your time worth um, more or less than what you're going to put in when you compare it to your work and and other things that you may need to get done, and then also what's best for your loved one. So as you go through this decision making process, you need to keep asking yourself, is this the best use of my time, or is it the best use of my money, and which gives you the better overall outcome? So what I see most often is that families don't run into trouble because of one big decision. It's a series of smaller decisions. And those decisions, they feel reasonable in the moment that you're making them, but over time, they do tend to add up. You can start to see the cost on jobs, the cost on your time more and more as time goes by. So if you think about your own situation, what's one thing that started small that's now just a part of the routine and might even be continuing to build?
And
So there might be a, go
Scott,
ahead.
I was just going to jump in and say that the Q&A is working, and a few folks did answer your last question. So Amy said that she usually
Okay.
handles the task herself, unless it's outside of her skill set. And then Tara said that they usually try to take care of it themselves. Um, but now with your current question, we can also see those results. So as they come in, I'll read them out to you, if any come in.
Okay. Great. Well, I'll go back a little bit. So just with why I shared about why folks tend to do those tasks initially on their own. Easier to do, maybe a sense of control. Do those resonate, or are there other reasons that you folks tend to jump into that initially? And Alex, I'm going to rely on you to help me on reading all that.
Yeah, right now, nothing yet, but I'll jump in when they do.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So as you think about maybe a task that started last month or 6 months ago, and think through, has it snowballed, and has it taken up a little more time just because maybe there's more to completing that task now? We all know caregiving is not a static situation. It evolves over time, but that's how it builds. So what we're going to do today is walk through a couple of key points where these types of decisions show up. And in each of these example decisions we're going to talk about, I want you to think about what you're actually deciding. Do you take this on yourself or do you get help? And how those decisions directly impact whether you stay on track for your own personal financial goals. So let's start with where caregiving often starts, and that's typically a type of event where something changes. And that could be a fall, it could be a hospitalization for a short period of time, or something, excuse me, something related to how medications have to be taken. As an example, 1 in 4 adults over age 65 fall every year. And quite often, um, you know, hips are broken or, really bad bruises. But a lot of these falls can be preventable. And so maybe you spend a couple $100 improving lighting or putting in a small ramp to help your mom get off and out of the porch into the house, or maybe a little more, 5,000 to 1,500 for some grab bars and maybe a new bathtub that they can get in and out easier. So those decisions seem pretty easy to think it's a good thing to do. Now, the other side of that is if something happens through a fall, costs can increase really quickly. I mean, you could be looking at very quickly 10, 20,000 in hospital stays, 5 to 15,000 to helping your grandfather rehab to try and get him back home. Um, and if he is able to go back home, then maybe suddenly you're having home care expenses coming in 4 to 8,000 a month, as an example. So I know you're caregivers, so a lot of these stats that I share, you're probably living, but it's not uncommon for a caregiver to be spending $7,000 to $10,000 a year out of your own pocket. So when I'm sharing, your spending, it's part of that pool of money, on average, that you're spending, that I'm referring to here. Um, so has anyone seen a situation or heard of a situation, either you've experienced or maybe a family friend, where a fall has changed everything? And if so, your experience of your friend's family or your own after that fall, does it usually go back to the way it was before? Not often, because the older a person gets, falling is a very, very serious situation. I'll share a story of, well, two quick stories. My grandfather, when was in his late 90s, and he was in a assisted living, and he fell, and that started um, his ending part of his journey. Um, the mother of a good friend of mine, so the mother would be in her mid 80s. She was carrying laundry up steps, and she fell forward and slid down a few steps, but she really messed up her leg and was in rehab for quite a while. She's better now, but she was fortunate. But the rehab part of it took a while. Could have been close to a year if I remember correctly. Medications is another scenario where situations can change quickly. For example, maybe your grandmother started out having to take, one high blood pressure pill a day, um, and that was it. But now she's, you know, a year down the road and suddenly there's 5 or 6 different prescriptions. Some have to be taken twice a day, some in the morning only with, with food to help her keep it in. So more complexity comes into play, more risk. So these are all examples where when these types of things happen, if you step in, maybe you're spending 6, 10 hours a week of your time initially, but there's a cost to that. That 6 to 10 hours of time is maybe having you leave work early if, in fact, the doctor's appointment can only be held during office hours, or maybe it's in the evening you go over, and that takes away from you spending your time watching your daughter's softball game. If you bring in help, then that could be 300 to 600 a month, or maybe a little more, depending on the situation and the needs. So now the decision becomes the 25 to 40 hours of time per month that you're providing the care, or is it better for you to spend the money to reduce the risk and create consistency, help you maintain your job, and continue with your career? So a lot of it comes down to what gives you the better outcome. And the better outcome being, um, again, that balance of the level of care. Certainly, that's the primary part. We all want to make sure that our loved ones are getting the best care. Um, but how that care is received is a combination of who does it, yourself, or if it's you're paying someone else. So once that something happens, the next challenge is how the decisions get made. And a lot of these decisions happen quickly. It's not uncommon to happen in hospitals. You may be told, well, they can't go home alone. Um, and so suddenly you're scrambling to maybe find them rehab, find them a senior apartment, or, if it is assisted living, adult daycare, whatever it might be, you're scrambling to find that either a transition phase, or if it's determined that it's going to be the longer term scenario. But you're in this situation. The hospital says your dad's being discharged in 3 days, and so suddenly you're trying to find availability of where he could live. So you're dealing with cost, and the time scenarios, and you have to make some quick decisions. I'm sure, as caregivers, you've all been in those type of quick situations that you've had to do your best to make those choices. So that's where a lot of long-term decisions get made. In that moment, people tend to choose what feels the safest. Well, I don't know. I don't know all the answers. I need more time, but I don't have more time. The doctor said that he's not going to be able to walk for 6 months. I've got all these things coming up. I'm just going to find him an assisted living facility as quickly as I can, and help him move in. So in that moment, without all the information and having to make a choice fairly quickly, people tend to lean towards the safest. But financially, it could mean that instead of only having to spend 4,000 a month, by getting your father into, have someone come home through home care, spend all day with him, and then you could be there with him in the evenings for a couple hours, versus moving him right into the assisted living facility and paying the 7 to 10,000 a month for the level of care. the best thing, and I'll tie all this together at the end here, but getting ahead of these decisions is really going to help. And it's not always easy to get ahead of the decisions. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So, getting ahead of the decisions is talk to the nurses as early as you can, talk to the care managers as early as you can, understand their perceptions and what they feel is going to happen as soon as you can. If it's on day one of going into the hospital, just really start understanding their feelings and the facts of the situation instead of waiting to learn the ultimate decision at the end. That way, even if you have a couple of additional days to make a phone call or to, you know, do some research online, it's going to make a huge difference. Um, so really, again, what you're deciding is where do you step in, whether it's kicking in some money to pay some things or with your time. Now, this is where things start to shift. Once you start making the decisions, it's not just about the one you're providing care for. It turns into you as well. And this is where I usually see people start to feel financial pressure. Not necessarily all at once, but it's there. You're starting to see your time be taken up, your energy, your availability. You're stepping in more, adjusting your schedule, whether it's after work or during the day, during the workday, weekends. But you're trying to find that balance, and you're trying to do the right thing. And again, we tend to fall back on the right thing is for me to take care of everything. And this is where those smaller decisions start to feel a lot more real. This is where your time starts to become a financial issue. Now, you may step in more to avoid paying for care, but that can affect your work, can affect your income, your long-term career aspirations. Maybe there's a promotion, coming down the road in 6 months, and the last 3 years you've just really been, you know, just crushing it at work, and that was your goal, and you were on your way, and now you're having to call in, leave early, call in, tell them you're going to be a little late. You're taking off for lunch to get your mom to the doctor's, showing up a little bit late at work again because there are more people in the doctor's office. So all these things start to snowball. And and obviously, if your income at work starts to get impacted, or if things get more stressful because your caregiving scenario is taking more time, then um, maybe you don't get that promotion. You have to start taking more hours off. You don't get that raise you were hoping for. Um, Worst case scenario, and it's close to about 50% of caregivers that are employees that end up quitting to become full-time caregivers. Now, a lot of those choices are based on, well, my company's not doing much to support me anyway, so why not? That's from the research I read and the folks I talk with, that's unfortunately a big part of that decision. But it certainly can be that your leader, your owner just doesn't get it, um, or you may feel uncomfortable sharing it. That's a big part of it too, because it's personal. You don't feel that they may understand. Um, you know, so all of these factors come into play on how it could impact your work scenario. So let me ask: has have any of you seen someone reduce work, or have you personally taken a step back because of caregiving? Or maybe you're starting to think about that as a possible next step.
Amy says not yet.
Okay. Amy, can you see things progressing in that manner, either because of leadership at work or just the demands of being a caregiver are becoming more significant? And that's okay if you don't want to share. I appreciate that. But this is really where the rubber hits the road. If someone reduces income by, I'm just using numbers of 20 to 30,000 a year. It could be, 200 a month. Any money that's sacrificed by giving up some work hours has huge impacts. But whatever that number is, if you multiply that over 3 to 5 years, that could easily turn into several thousands of dollars, up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And certainly, if the worst case scenario happens that either you're forced to resign or you choose to for whatever reason, then certainly whatever your income is lost for however many years you're a caregiver, you're losing benefits. So what I'm saying is this is all a balance, and it's a hard balance to strike. And but there are ways to look at these scenarios um, from a more analytic viewpoint, of course. Um, and the questions on the financial side turn to, I mentioned earlier, it's an opportunity cost. What's worth more or less? Your time, providing maybe some additional money out of your pocket if your loved ones are in a situation where they can't afford it themselves, and you're finding that you are kicking in that 7 to 10,000 a year on average the caregivers do. So you're finding that balance of, what those opportunity costs are, and what has greater value for you. Is it your time? Is it making sure that your loved one gets the best care? And how does all of these factors impact your own financial goals? So as care becomes more consistent, the next question becomes, how is this being handled day to day? And this is where many families jump in and either don't or cannot step back from the amount of care that they're providing. That you just find yourself keep adding more and more time, providing more help, taking on more responsibility. Um, there's in work, there's different ways to phrase this, but there's work creep, or there's project creep. And the word creep just means it slowly over time, just a simple task starts to take more time, and then more time. um, these don't feel like big decisions, because oftentimes it's like, well, I'm only there half an hour additional a week, no big deal. So, but then, the next month, maybe it's, instead of 30 minutes, it's 40 minutes. So that's what I mean by creep. You can't necessarily feel it. It's not as if you're jumping in from 0 hours to 50 hours. Maybe you're jumping in from 0 hours to 5 hours a week of care. And then that's not a big deal. And then, 2 months later, it's 5.5 hours. Yeah, still not a big deal. 8 months down the road, it's 12 hours. And, it just keeps ramping up, and often so slowly that you just don't even recognize it. It just feels like what needs to be done. But structured care looks a little different. Structured care is when you step back and you ask, what actually needs to be done? What is the actual task that needs to be accomplished? You know, when does it need to be done? Is it weekly? Is it once a month? Is it, when it happens? Um, do you have the skill set? Do you have the time to do it? If not, it's okay to delegate. Who's the best person to do it? Is it hiring someone if you can? Is it a family member that has the skill set and would happily do it? If you take a step back for a second, I just want you to think how much of what you're doing right now actually requires you. And I think that's a starting point to regain control. And again, ultimately, if you can regain control of your time, you're going to ideally regain control of your work schedule again and not be impacted, negatively at work in your retirement. So it's okay to ask yourself, take that step back and just ask, how much of what you're doing right now actually requires you? Is it your sense of pride? Um, is it just you haven't asked anybody else? Maybe you have a cousin that's really close to your grandfather as well. They're a little more laid back, but they're really good with, organizing things. So maybe, if you're trying to get your grandfather's house organized, they're the one to do it. So think of those opportunities. So this is where making stronger decisions start. And if you're doing something that could be handled by someone else for 10, 15, 25, $35 an hour, and your time is worth equal to that amount or greater, then maybe maybe it makes sense to find someone to fill that need and keeping you engaged on your career. Again, this is all assuming that what's primarily important is your loved one is getting the quality of care. If the quality is being achieved through these other avenues, it might be a strong consideration. So let's talk now a little bit about how certain things get paid for, because this is where a lot of people get surprised. We're going to talk a little bit about insurance as the example, but a lot of folks assume, well, my grandmother has insurance, it's all good. She's 69, she's on Medicare. Um, Medicare will cover skilled nursing homes, and um, it does, but only for 3 days. You have to be being treated for, I shouldn't say 3 days, it can be up to 100 days, but you have to be treated for the same reason you were in the hospital, and you have to be discharged directly into the um, facility. So there's a lot of hurdles that have to be met. But and then there's co-payments, and then at the end of the 100th day, it ends. So, but for that kind of lack of understanding, and it covers skilled care for a very short period of time in very specific situations. People tend to think it covers it forever. Um, so there's a lot of assumptions about insurance covering things where it actually doesn't. Curious how many, if you're fortunate where a family member might have a long-term care policy, how many of you have closely looked at a long-term care policy? And that's okay. Many people can't afford long-term care policies. They're hugely expensive. Um, and even if your loved one were to have it, most people don't pull the contract out until they have to. But at a high level, here's how a long term care policy works. Most policies tend to have what's called an elimination period, where um, there's a time frame, typically 30, 60, 90 days, that where your loved one is in the facility or receiving the care that the policy will cover, where you're paying those benefits out of pocket for that elimination time frame. And so at some point, you file a claim to the insurance company saying, my mom, she's in assisted living or skilled care, whatever it might be, and we'd like to start receiving the benefits from the policy. So you file a claim, and you go in to that process anticipating that the claim is going to be accepted. And at the end of that elimination period, say it's 90 days, that on day 91, you're going to receive a check for the previous 90 days. Well, that's another expectation that will probably not be met because most long term care policies are what are called reimbursement policies, where the insurance company is going to need you to provide the expenses for those 30, 60, 90 days. And so you'll have had to have kept really great records of how the money was spent, how much, it cost per day or per month for the facility. Was there any rehab that was part of it that the policy said they'll cover? So you have to track all this stuff, and then you file the claim and send it in. And, you know, you're pretty good at filling out paperwork. So you're pretty confident all the I's have been dotted and T's have been crossed. Well, I have no doubt that's the case. However, the insurance company receives all of this, and the first thing they're going to do is want information, which would be part of the claims process, on the facility that you chose. And they're going to want to understand how that facility describes the type of care that they provide. And then once the insurance company has that type of information, they're going to look at the actual contract, and they're going to make sure the definitions of care that your facility states they provide and how they say they provide it aligns with, their definitions in the contract, as an example. And so oftentimes the claim may be denied initially because the insurance company has a couple of questions on the type of care that, is either you said is being received, and or that the company says they do provide. So that may take some additional time, or they may deny it straight out, and then you have to refile it and kind of figure it out. But the point is, receiving payouts from insurance companies, we all know, is not the easiest thing. So that expectation of receiving money on day 91 of the elimination period, if it's a reimbursement policy, that expectation would not be met. So you'd have to fund it not only for the 90 days, but also maybe an additional 30, perhaps 45, 50, 60 days. So that's an example of where being aware of things as early as possible is going to help eliminate a lot of challenges. So right away in that scenario, your family might be trying to cover 12, 18,000 a month for a skilled facility. And even after that, most policies, well, I touched on that, are reimbursement, and they tend to wait until after, another 30 days or so after the elimination period. So maybe out of pocket, you're looking at 20, 30, 40, 50,000 that has to be paid depending on the type of care. Um, so the key is understand medical insurance, understand long-term care contracts as early as possible, use approved providers, document everything, and expect delays. Because during that gap, someone's covering the cost. And how that cost is covered is either going to come back to your time or perhaps your money or a combination of both. So if we step back and kind of look at everything we've talked about tonight, I guess really what all this comes down to is the decisions you make between using your time and using your money and making sure your loved one gets the quality care. All of these decisions are what shape your financial future. Now, I know I didn't get into specifics on how 401k plans work or taxes or any of that part tonight because I my experience shows that this is where the impact of a person's financial future starts. There's always room to get into the technical side, but this is where it starts. And so I like to have this conversation when I'm able, just to help plant seeds that, you do have some opportunities here. There are some different ways to look at the situation. There are people to help you. Some of this is a business decision as far as opportunity cost. What's going to give you more time based on what's important to you? Is it your time or maybe saving $1? Um, those are personal choices and they're all valid, of course. But it's the decisions you make in this triangle, if you will, making sure your loved one gets the care, your time and how that's impacted, and any financial gap or ways to pay for things. So, and I'll happily answer any questions on the technical side if you have any tonight, certainly. So a couple questions, how do you actually make stronger decisions? I'd, I'd like to lead into um, the Q&A part just by asking some general questions. Um, think about a current situation in your life now, something you're dealing with right now, and we'll kind of walk through the steps. And we've talked about it before, but we'll go over it again. First step is what actually needs to be done. Second step, does it require you to do it? Third step, and this is all in the handout that you folks will be getting. Third step is what does this cost you in time, and what might it cost you financially, either at work or paying out of pocket for things. You have to understand a little bit about what it would cost to get help, and then that would help you figure out what has the greater opportunity cost, maybe work out some break even points. Well, I can do 10 hours a month, and if I can get someone for the other 15 hours a month, then that's a happy median, and I'm happy with that. Step 5, the question is, what decision is going to give the better overall result that you're seeking to obtain? Again, leading with the best quality of care, but followed up very quickly by, is that going to be met through more of your time, less of your time, more of your financial assets, less of your financial assets? And again, that decision is not only how it may impact your life today, but the financial creep that will happen over time. If you give up 10 hours a month of pay this year, But what about next year and the following year? How's that reduction in your 401k savings going to impact your retirement? Those types of decisions. Um, because you're not just managing the care, that's the primary part without question, but you're also managing your future at the same time. So, when you step back and look at all of this, it's balancing caregiving and retirement. It comes down to one thing, and that's making thoughtful decisions about your time and your money, because every decision you make affects your future. And over time, these decisions add up. They can add up easily to tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the goal isn't to do everything yourself or to spend blindly to pay someone. It's to find that right balance for your loved one and for yourself. So as you think about these situations, where might it make sense to step back a little bit from the responsibilities you've taken on? Are there opportunities to bring in help? Again, it could be a neighbor, it could be a third cousin that has a skill set and he loves to help people. Um, it could be a local charity. There I know we feel we live in a world where people don't care. But since I've focused on supporting families in caregiving situations, my world has opened, um, and my eyes have opened to the amount of people that do want to help and the resources out there. Even if it's just one small area, one decision that you feel is not a huge life decision, but maybe that makes enough of a difference that it's going to free up a little more time where you can attend your daughter's ball game, or allow you to definitely make that monthly meeting at work. And again, that gets your career back on track. So um, yeah, those were the ways I chose to tie in how caregiving impacts your financial future in our conversation tonight. So I'd love to get into a little bit of a conversation on some of this. If you have other questions, and like I said, I can certainly and happily answer some more technical questions tonight, or at a different time. But I just find when I get too much into details that people tend to check out. So I try to make things a little more realistic, if you will. So yeah.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, if anyone has any questions for Scott or wants him to dive into a more technical question, topic, etc., this is the time to ask.
And
Um, if
I'll
you
stick
raise your
around for as long as it takes.
Yeah, so you guys have a rare opportunity to talk to Scott here with the floor is yours. If anyone has a question, just raise your hand and I can unmute you, and then that way you could talk to us live. Or if you want your question to just be in the chat, that's also totally cool, and I can read that for Scott as well. And in the meantime, while we wait for any questions to come in, I guess Scott, if you were going to say elevator pitch, like the spark notes of everything that you just said in terms of the most actionable items that you want people to walk away from this webinar with to kind of empower them to start working on these items, what would you say those few items are? Um, I guess in the most grocery list style possible.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get you a handout that you could email them.
Hmm.
But that aside, that'll help a little bit. So I would I would just start thinking about the relationship of time and money in your situation. Are you are you in that situation where either the amount of time that you're putting into care is starting to feel overwhelming, or is it you're taking too much time off work and you're starting to feel impacts on that side? So I think that's initially going to help you figure out where that imbalance of power, if you will, might be impacting you now. The second step is I would have you think about tasks that you accepted that you have and you're gratefully doing, and you love helping out, but that one or two tasks that you're not real strong in, that maybe takes an hour and a half for you to do, versus you watch a video online and it says it should take you half an hour. So maybe there are some of those scenarios, some things that you're doing that you love helping, but you're like, oh, man, I'm just not getting this. I'm not strong enough to lift them in and out of the bathtub, or these finances, I can't get organized, or these, like me personally, I don't understand medical terms. So meds and all of that, I probably do my best to find someone to help in that regard. Um, but that's just an example for me. So there might be others that you feel you're just not real strong at. You get through it, no harm, no foul. But your gut's telling you that if I could hand this off, I'd really prefer to. So you have first where the pressure is, the time you're putting in, or is it the financial? And then what task or tasks don't fit your skill set or what you're comfortable doing, and then you find how to fill that, and how you fill it will probably help both on freeing up time and perhaps financially. As I said, there's a lot of nonprofits out there that have a lot of really interesting services. um, they'll pick folks up, take them to doctor's appointments as part of what they do, as an example. So, but there's a lot of resources. Um, so I would start with those two. Keep it simple. Don't get too crazy in all of this. And then, if there is a task, then the third step, um, although I said I would leave it at that, the third step would be, you know, find someone or a resource that will take that task. And as I said, maybe there's one part of that task. Maybe that task has 5 steps, and maybe the first 2 steps is what's slowing you down. So what can you do? Who can you find? What resources there to help you with those first 2 steps? And then those first 2 steps might be taking up that whole hour, and then once you get through that, everything else does take you the 20 minutes. So really get analytic on some of this stuff and think it through. Give yourself grace on these decisions. I've worked with enough caregivers in these hard scenarios to to know that we all feel certain levels of guilt as we make these choices. But I just ask that you provide yourself grace, because what we didn't touch on is the average caregiver, family caregiver, winds up getting 2 of their own chronic diseases over time. And I don't want that to happen to anyone. So all of this comes together: health, time, finances, quality of care. Um, so that's how I'd answer that. Focus on those first 3 things.
Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah.
I see there's still a handful of folks who are still with us. Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask Scott? Oh, we have one. So an anonymous question. Are there any tax credits or mechanisms to reduce tax burden for those caring for a loved one? What would be necessary to claim a parent as a dependent?
So that's your primary opportunity. And to claim a parent or someone as a dependent, they have to live with you. Um, Depends on certain factors. 6 months or more, as an example, but there's certain guidelines you need to meet. Um, and you're paying for their majority of their expenses and so forth. Um, but no, there's not a lot of credits in the tax code that support a family caregiver, unfortunately.
I guess on that theme of uh, financial credits, besides the tax credits, are there any other good financial advices that might help in a general sense for caregivers, regardless of state, location, etc.?
So when a lot of that depends on where you are in your caregiving journey. It's the situation that you find yourself that often provides the opportunities financially that you have. The earlier you start looking into the financial side of things, the more opportunities you'll have as the caregiver, and the more opportunities maybe your mom, dad, or grandmother will have to protect themselves further. Um, so that could mean, um, again, maybe they're starting to forget things, and dementia. Your family has a history of dementia, so you start talking with the doctors about your grandmother's visits, and the doctors strongly indicating that, yeah, probably in another 6 months or so, if things continue, this is going to be required. So having those conversations just gives you time to research, to talk to someone like myself. Um, if you're, and this happens often, you have no time to think. Your dad has a stroke. Your mom passed years ago. You never talked to your dad about his finances. You have no idea what he has, where he has it, who has the legal right to speak on his behalf. Does anybody have the legal right to speak on his behalf? So you're dealing with care, you're dealing with getting your arms wrapped around things. So from that standpoint, it's just a matter of getting organized as quickly as you can. And getting organized in that stressful situation is knowing what you need to know to get through those initial tough decisions. It's not needing to know everything yet. It's needing to know what your decisions are and what pieces of the puzzle you need to know knowledge wise to make those decisions. And so, again, finding the resources, an elder care lawyer, a estate planning lawyer, a financial advisor that you can quickly explain a scenario and allow someone to help answer those questions for you is the most efficient way to go about it. Um, yeah, so I know that's kind of vague, but it honestly does depend on where you are in the caregiving journey as to what opportunities you have. And the other side of that is what either you currently have in place financially or what your loved ones currently have in place financially. So, trying to see, are there any pieces of the puzzle that could be added to their situation, or if there's a piece of the puzzle that's not working and it needs to be replaced. And that could be anything from, maybe in the past they were gifting money because they were healthy and didn't have all these expenses, but suddenly they can't afford to gift anymore. So, that could be a change in strategy. Um, Again, if you're finding that you need as a caregiver to give 7 to 10,000 out of your pocket, well, okay, how do you come up with that? Can part of it be out of your cash flow? Are you going to have, do you have any non retirement assets that you could use? Is this going to be an ongoing scenario that, you can take a distribution from, a joint brokerage account that you and your husband got started or you and your wife got started years ago? Or is this going to be an ongoing scenario for 5, 10 years, and you really need to figure this out from an ongoing strategy? Because at some point, maybe you're going to burn through your cash, you're going to burn through the joint brokerage account, and then you're going to have to take some money from your 401k. So then that gets you into some tax strategies. Do you do a little bit of the IRA along the way or wait all at the end? So, all of that comes into play. And that just depends on your situation.
Gotcha. Thank you, Scott. Are there any more questions from folks? No need to be shy. This is the time to ask, and Scott has the answers as you heard from these last few questions and answers. They've been very detailed and helpful. But yeah, I'll give it another minute or two, and if no questions come in, we
Yeah.
can close things out. But are there any other thoughts that come to mind as we give folks another chance to ask any questions, Scott?
So, um, I just want to, again, I mentioned have the grace, give yourself the grace, um, and don't be afraid to ask for help. I know in many scenarios, depending on family dynamics and a lot of factors, you as a caregiver may be finding and feeling that you're isolated, that no one cares, that you're all alone. I'm here to tell you you are not. Um, I don't care if you have a bad day and need someone to vent, send me an email. I'm here. If you just need to vent on something, and I'm not going to charge you for those types of, I just can you answer a quick question, Scott? I don't even know how to get started. Can you give me like an initial, if I can help solve that stress point, I'm happy to have that 15, 20-minute conversation and guide you. But the point is there are people that want to help. So if you're feeling isolated, that nobody cares, that you're alone, take to heart that you're not. Seek the help. There is help out there. If you're not sure where to find it, again, shoot me an email, give me a quick call. If I don't know, I'll help you find it. I've got a lot of resources.